I think it's fair to say that over the past year, I've amassed a fair few handheld gaming consoles, and in this video, I'm going to attempt to rank them in some sort of order. Now, I'm going to preface this video with the fact that I don't really get on with the concept of favourites. My favourite thing is whatever I'm into at any given time, and it's subject to change at the drop of a hat. However, I have amassed a total of 8 different handheld consoles this year, and in this video what I'm going to try and do is put them in some sort of order, not necessarily as to which one is the best. I'm also going to factor in the different advantages that each one has to offer, but also just being realistic that even though some of them have their shortcomings, I can't argue with the fact that I've spent more time playing with some than others. So we'll break all that down as we go along. But yeah, what I've got here is the collection of the main handhelds. Well, all the handhelds really that I've picked up. Some of them I've not included in this list are things where I have just made modifications to existing consoles, but I think a special mention needs to go to the modification for the Game Boy Color, where you can now fit an OLED screen. I think this creates an absolutely jaw-dropping visual impact to one of my favourite consoles. This is the Game Boy Color with the OLED screen. The blacks are solid black. The colours I think look great. Some have argued that they look a little too saturated, but yeah, I am a big fan of this. So special mention to this in terms of mods. If you've already got an existing Game Boy Color, particularly if you've got one that's got a damaged screen or damage to the shell, then that is the mod to go for. But we're not really talking about mods today. We're talking about handheld gaming consoles, whether they are for actually playing Game Boy games or whether they emulate. I've tended to get quite a few because they each have different strengths. They each have different things to offer. I've never really come up to one where I think this is the ultimate handheld I now don't need anymore, and I'd be stupid to think that that's ever going to happen anytime soon. But what we've got here is a range of different ones from different manufacturers. There's the FunnyPlaying FPGBC, there's the TrimUI SmartPro, there's the Anbernic SP, there's the Miyoo Mini V4, there's the TrimUI Brick, there is the PowKiddy V10, also the PowKiddy RGB20SX, and the Analogue Pocket Aluminium edition, which cost more than all the others put together. But we'll get onto that as we go along. As I said, I am going to try and attempt to rank these in order. You will probably disagree with my order, but I think it's less about what place they come in, it's more about the why. So hopefully you'll at least agree with the points that I've got, and I'd be really interested to hear what you think in the comments once we're all done. Anyway, let's clear some space and get started. So first up, in 8th place, although it feels all kinds of wrong to put this in last place because it is a great little console, is the PowKiddy V10. Now this one I didn't buy immediately. A lot of people got it and there was a lot of hype about it. There was a lot of excitement. I watched all the reviews and I got it a little bit late on, which is no problem at all. It meant I got it for a good price and I'm really happy with what I've got. However, shortly after that, the Miyoo Mini V4 became available again, and I bought that, and then I was tinkering with that and I was distracted away. So this hasn't really had the love that it deserves, but that's not to say it's a bad console. Let's just take a little look. The width of the screen on this is the key thing that makes it stand out. Now I thought this was going to be very small, but actually it's a fairly chunky console. I think the width of it makes it look like it's going to be quite short, but if you look at the height of it compared to, say, the Miyoo Mini, it's actually taller than the Miyoo Mini. But the key strength of this one, although it runs lots of different systems, is the width of the screen. That particular aspect ratio makes it absolutely perfect for Game Boy Advance. And in fact, if you are a fan of Game Boy Advance and this is the only thing you're likely to be playing on it, you cannot go wrong in terms of this console. It emulates Game Boy Advance really well, but the display, the size, the aspect ratio of it, I mean, look at that. It is just absolutely spot on for that console. Ergonomics wise, I thought it was going to be really uncomfortable. It looked like the buttons are quite low down, but in fact, because of the positioning of the shoulder buttons on the back, which are quite comfortable, smooth, curved, they don't stick out too much, your fingers sort of sit there and then naturally your thumbs sit in place. It doesn't feel like they're too kind of far down. It doesn't feel like you're kind of holding it at the bottom there. The ergonomics are better than the console suggests. It's got a few quirks. There's no volume settings. There's a lot of kind of keyboard shortcuts with these plus and minus buttons that I don't think they necessarily needed. But I mean, look at that screen, look at that display for Game Boy Advance. That is what is the real selling point. If you're not interested in Game Boy Advance, I don't think this is really going to be the console for you. It does emulate everything else well. You will end up with a lot of borders down the side if you're emulating like Game Boy, Super Nintendo and so on. It's great for those, and the size of the screen means that they still look good. However, this one I would recommend very much as a one-stop Game Boy Advance solution. I think it's epic for that. So yeah, great console, but unfortunately, because we've got such strong competition, this one is in 8th place. Next up, and I know this is going to seem like, again, an absolute crime, the classic, the one that kind of started this whole craze in many ways, the Miyoo Mini. In this case, the V4. There are slight tweaks compared to the original, largely down to shortages with the screen. When it came out in the first place, it sold very quickly and they couldn't get hold of the hardware. So this is a rework of it. But the screen itself is actually very good. I do have the Miyoo Mini Plus, which is like a larger version of it. That has a few things that this doesn't, which surprised me once I got it, because I didn't really... Let's just clean up that screen a little bit. I didn't really read up on it and do my homework, and that can sometimes backfire a little bit. However, the strength of the Miyoo Mini Plus I could use to support this. For instance, it doesn't have Wi-Fi, which means you can't do any on-the-go updates to Onion OS. I have got Onion OS on this because the operating system is installed on the SD card. So if you own both, if you own the Miyoo Mini Plus, then you can do your over-the-air updates on that console and then just swap the card over to this one with no problems at all. Also, this doesn't have rumble. The Miyoo Mini Plus has rumble, and the shoulder buttons I was a bit disappointed with. They feel a little bit lightweight, a little bit flimsy. So those shortcomings are what kind of pull it a little further down the list. But I had always wanted one of these, and it's not disappointed me at all. It is absolutely tiny little dinky machine. It's slim as well. It's so pocketable, so portable, but surprisingly the ergonomics are quite good. It's not uncomfortable to play on, even for a fairly long amount of time. The display on the screen is great. Like if I go to, let's just go to Neo Geo Pocket, King of Fighters R2, and as that loads, you will see that the size of the display is actually pretty good there. You know, you compare that to your original Game Boys and things like that, it's a fair display there, and it looks good. The colors look great. In fact, the colors I think look a little richer than they do on the Miyoo Mini Plus, so it's got that advantage over it. Comparing it side by side with my Plus, the colors on the Plus look a little bit washed out. This is a nice screen. I thought it might be a compromised screen as it's not the original one, but yeah, as a console, this is great. Portability wise, oh, it's fabulous. I mean, I'm going to be talking about the TrimUI Brick, and let's just compare the two. It's quite a bit smaller than that one. But yeah, I had always wanted one of these. It had been difficult to get hold of them. I'd got the Plus, I love the Plus, but when these finally became available, I wanted to get one. It was available in yellow, so I had to get the yellow one. It has not disappointed. It's a great one for having on those sort of lunch breaks, things like that. You can just sling it in a pocket and grab it out. And the great thing about it is the sleep mode and resuming your games works pretty well. So you can just press the button there, put it on hold, and then come back to it. And also my favorite thing is where you can press this center button and then just cycle through the different games that you've been playing and switch back to anything else you'd been previously playing, jump straight back in and carry on playing that within a matter of seconds. So yeah, the Miyoo Mini V4 is a fantastic system. I'd wanted a Miyoo Mini for ages. It didn't disappoint. And if you want to get one of these, get Onion OS on it and you'll be laughing. It is great. Now in 6th place, I've got the PowKiddy RGB20SX, and some would argue it is criminal to put this higher up than the other ones on the list, but bear with me. Let's just take a moment to look at this. As I said, in this list there will be some caveats. This is largely down to how much time, how much enjoyment I've had out of these consoles throughout the year. And in the case of this one, I've definitely got a soft spot for it. In terms of reviews, it wasn't necessarily reviewed particularly favorably by a lot of people. It did have some shortcomings. I delved into doing quite a few mods to try and make it better, and I enjoyed that process. So that kind of factors into my enjoyment of the console. So other than this being stock, I mean, first things first, this square screen, right? So this is a vertical version of pretty much the same thing that I got last year, which is the RGB30. The RGB30 has the controls at the side here. However, this one has them lower down in a traditional kind of Game Boy setup. So the big selling point of this one for me is that screen. That square screen is perfect for Pico 8, which is like a whole Netflix library of retro style pixelated games with a 1:1 screen aspect ratio, and this for me is just perfect for that. The slight shortcomings of it were that it didn't have rumble, the D-pad was a little bit iffy, and there were some huge kind of ski slope shoulder buttons on the back. What I did with this was I found some guidance online to be able to install a rumble motor in there. There is actually space on the motherboard where you can solder a rumble motor to it and just stick it in place, and that works great. Also, you can put some tape down on the motherboard to improve the response of the D-pad to avoid false diagonals, which is great for games like Celeste. It makes it much more playable. Those shoulder buttons, I spent quite a bit of time doing some 3D modeling and designed some that I could 3D print that fit more flush with the console. They are very comfortable to use, and to be honest, they absolutely transform this console for me. It made it feel much more solid, much more, it's much less, like it sticks out less at the back. It's much, I wouldn't say flat because you've got this bit here, but it feels great to use, and I've played it lots. I enjoyed all the modding. I love how it looks. I love the color. I love that square screen. I think it got a lot of disappointed, sort of dismissive reviews at the time. I've played on this thing loads. I love it. I think the form factor, the ergonomics, everything else are great. So yeah, I'm a champion of this console. If you can pick one up cheap, it is definitely worth checking out. So these shoulder buttons I have put on my printables page. You can go on there, you can download those for nothing, print them off yourself or get someone else to print them for you, like PCBWay or somewhere like that. Stick them in your console and see the difference that they make. I think they absolutely transform it. And I'm not just saying that to show off. Like I've made version after version after version to try and get to a point where it's something that I was happy with. So I am happy with them. I would recommend you try those. If you've got this console already, check out my buttons. Let me know what you think. And it's even got a little happy face on the front. What more could you want from a handheld console? So in 5th place, and again, this might surprise you, it's the TrimUI Brick. Now, although this is in a fairly, what you might call a low spot on this list, it is actually my current favorite. However, I've not really had it for long enough to spend enough time and decide whether it really is going to get more use than all the other consoles that I've got. But wow, since I've got hold of this one, it has truly impressed me. It has got so much to offer in a tiny little package. And I think the thing that I like the best about it is that it feels like it's doing something new. Since the popularity of the Miyoo Mini, every single handheld that comes along seems to kind of try and ape the original Game Boy style with the style of the D-pad and this kind of speaker in the lower right corner, where we've got things like, even on a console like this PowKiddy V10, where the speaker's here, it's still got that kind of styling on there, still got the more rounded corner on the lower right. And in this case, we've moved away from that. The shape and style of this borrows much more from the Analogue Pocket with a much more modern design. And I think it fares well from doing that. More on the Analogue Pocket shortly. It is small though. I mean, you know, I was expecting, when I first saw the actual images of this, I was expecting it to be the same size as the Analogue Pocket, but how wrong I was. It's almost, you know, half the size of the Analogue Pocket. I was completely new to TrimUI this year. I'd never come across their consoles before. I had the SmartPro, which we'll talk about shortly, and a little while after the Brick, and I love my vertical format handheld consoles. This is quite a small one. It's got some cool little features like the light up LEDs here and at the top and on the buttons there. A nice little turquoise accent power button that actually lights up when you're charging and changes color when it's fully charged. There's loads of nice little touches on this console, but the main thing about it, not just the portability, it's the presentation. It's how premium it feels. It's got a metal backplate that kind of stiffens up the whole feel of the console. I've not yet found out what type of plastic it's made out of, but it definitely feels different to the usual. It's got sort of a slightly harder, more ceramic feeling surface to it, and I think the whole thing just feels epic. Like where you apply any pressure about it, there's no give, there's no squidge. It feels like a solid little unit. The screen, oh wow, the screen is just stunning. Like the pixel density on there, even though it's a small screen, it looks fantastic when it's emulating a whole range of different consoles. It hasn't got analog sticks, which to me isn't really a negative. I think a lot of the time, you know, when you've got consoles like the RGB20SX, your control panel can feel a bit cluttered, and there's compromises made, like using these sticks, they are in a bit of an awkward spot. So doing away with them altogether allows me to focus on really what I like to emulate, and that's the old 16-bit, 8-bit games, the old handhelds like Game Boy Color, Neo Geo Pocket Color. It is brilliant for all of that. It does struggle a little bit with some of the later emulators, things like Nintendo 64, PlayStation Portable. They struggle a bit, but to be honest, look at it. It looks, feels like a Game Boy. Any sort of Game Boy type game will run really well on this. I've been running it with a kind of unofficial version of the TrimUI CrossMix OS, which makes it a really nice sort of system to interact with, really easy to navigate your way through the different settings, the different apps and so on. So yeah, I am a big fan of this. There's been some concerns about the heat coming from this. It is actually a heatsink. It's got the CPU directly behind it, so it is designed to dissipate heat. That will reduce the amount of heat inside the console. I don't play anything particularly demanding because I said it kind of struggles a bit with that anyway. I've played for hours and hours and hours on Game Boy Color, and I've not had any issues with this overheating. So yeah, that's not been a concern for me yet. But as I say, I am relatively new to this console, which is why I don't want to fully commit to putting it at the top of this list. But I was definitely thinking about it. It has got a lot to offer, and if you're on the fence about getting one of these, it is a brilliant console, and I think it's the one that feels most like it's doing something new, doing something different. So yeah, highly recommended. Love the TrimUI Brick, and the little customizable buttons on the back are a lot of fun as well. So yeah, that one, really, really good. Now next up, again, one that I really don't feel like I played enough on. This is Anbernic's answer to the Game Boy Advance SP, and it is really awesome. So one thing to bear in mind with this is I've got it running Miyoo OS. This is a custom operating system that is really, really good on this system. Much, much better than the stock operating system. So as you scroll through the games, we've got the display with the cartridge and the packaging and the region and everything else. And then you open up, and what we get is this bezel kind of effect around here, because the screen itself isn't perfect for, you know, Game Boy Advance emulation. Unlike the kind of widescreen aspect we were talking about on the V10 before, this one isn't like that. However, they cleverly get around that by using the bottom half of the screen to resemble the bezel, and the quality of the display means that it blends in perfectly with the actual bezel around the screen. So yeah, this really does look like a slightly beefed up Game Boy Advance SP. The hinge is improved, it's nice and solid, but it does look very much like the original. It works, behaves in exactly the same way. You can also set it to go into sleep mode while it's closed, which you couldn't do with the original SP. That came in with the DS, but you go like that and then it will either shut down or it will sort of bring it back from sleep mode. What you have to do to bring it back from sleep mode is open it up and just press the power button once, and it will, I think I said, there's loads of different settings, and it is a while since I've used this. Like I say, one of the downsides of this is that I feel like I didn't give it enough love. I spent a lot of time trying to get Miyoo OS installed on there. In fact, I would say that's, for me, one of the downsides. I'm not very good at fiddling about and getting those things set up. I can find it quite frustrating. It took me quite a while to do. There are great tutorials out there. Most people would cope fine with it. I found it quite tricky. In terms of the shutdown, there are lots of options within Miyoo OS. The sleep mode isn't great, so if you shut it and have it in sleep mode, it's not fantastic. So I got it to just shut itself down when you close the lid, but there's loads of different options, and that's pretty good on these firmware systems. We've got Drill Dozer here. Okay, now one of the things about Drill Dozer is that the original cartridge has Rumble built in. Well, this console has Rumble built in as well, so you can play Drill Dozer quite effectively. Again, the reason I didn't play on this much is I got it all set up, and then shortly after I got my Analogue Pocket, and that's often like a recurring pattern with me. I'll get that new shiny thing and whatever I had before gets left behind, and that's through no fault of this. I think Out of all the ones in this list, I think this is the one I need to spend more time with. There were a few things I had issues with. The stock firmware wasn't great, but since I installed Miyoo OS, it's a much slicker system. I think it looks great with all the right sort of overlays, bezels. It's got the display set up so it looks kind of slightly pixelated like the original Game Boy Advance. And also, like I say, running games like Drill Dozer or things like Pokemon Pinball. It's got the rumble built into the console. It's quite a substantial little rumble. It doesn't feel all rattly. It's like the whole console vibrates. Speaking of rattly though, one of the issues I originally had with this was the buttons. They are quite clicky buttons, and when you press those, there's quite a bit of clicking and feedback. I'll put it just next to my mic. They sound and feel much better. I did a whole video about how I modded those. I added little bits of felt on the inside to kind of soften the impact between plastic on plastic. With that all done, with Miyoo OS installed, with the buttons kind of with a much better feedback to them, with the built-in rumble, with the amount of games I got on there, this is a really fantastic console. We were all waiting on Miyoo to bring out their flip console. Anbernic came out of nowhere and nailed it. Miyoo have really got their work cut out in terms of coming up with a sort of clamshell format handheld emulator that is anywhere near as good as this. Highly recommended. Okay, so we're up to the top 3, and in 3rd place, the aluminium Analogue Pocket. I was torn on this one. I was very close to putting it in last place, but to be honest, out of all of my different handhelds, this is still the one I've played on the most this year. Let's take a little look at it. So for a long time now, I've always had people telling me that the Analogue Pocket was the best way to enjoy my Game Boy games, that the screen was fantastic, that the system emulated the games perfectly, that the ergonomics were good. So I'd put off buying one for a long time. And then in a moment of madness, when they announced the aluminium edition, and I bought into all the hype about every single part being individually precision machined, I bought one and immediately regretted spending so much money. There's videos about there on my channel already if you want to check those out. However, once I got over that initial buyer's remorse, it's a console that I have played, as I say, more than any this year, including all of my sort of TV consoles. This has had the most playtime from me. So why was I going to put it right at the bottom of my list, and why have I changed my mind about that? Well, it has so much to offer, and it does so much well that all the other consoles don't, that it is a crying shame that it fails on what feels like the basics. So let me just explain. The things I have issues with on this console are that the D-pad is awful. It's comfortable, it's nice to use, but it puts incorrect diagonals in all the time, these false diagonals. I played right through Drill Dozer. You can actually get it to vibrate because the cartridge slot, you can put the DS rumble pack in there that comes with Metroid Prime Pinball, and then you can get rumble on your games, which is kind of cool. So I played right through Drill Dozer, and there's a lot of precision, diagonal and up and to the right kind of inputs on there, and they will kind of merge together and cause some issues. So the D-pad is problematic, and sometimes when I'm trying to drop shapes on Tetris, for instance, they might move to the side if I'm slightly over to the side there. Secondly, the face buttons, you can sometimes get repeated inputs, as in I press that once and it will input twice. So again, when I'm playing Tetris, instead of a shape doing a quarter turn, it might do a half turn. And in a heated game at high speeds, that can be a game breaker, and that is incredibly frustrating. To a slightly lesser extent, I find the shoulder buttons a little awkward, and also they're quite noisy. You get this kind of springy metallic sound. Again, on the mic there, just that sounds anything but premium. It's a crying shame because the actual aluminium shell feels really nice. Like, some people complained it's too heavy. I like the weight, I like that heft. It's very comfortable to play. The screen is beautiful, the ergonomics are good. It just feels, I don't know how to describe it, it just feels very satisfying to play on. But by having the issues with the buttons and the D-pad and these, it's like there's some impenetrable barrier between that awesome experience of what the console has to offer and me as a player. It's hampered by those, and for that reason it's not at the top. So when I got this, after all the things that everyone had said about this being the only Game Boy I would ever need, and thinking I'm going to get this premium version, this aluminium version, I thought this was going to be literally the best thing in my collection. And it's just so sad that it's let down by things that so many other consoles get right quite easily. One other issue I've had with it, and again, this is something that should be quite straightforward, yet lots of these don't even take Game Boy cartridges. The main appeal to this was that I could play my original cartridges on it. However, for all of its precision engineered aluminium, when you put the cartridge in, it kind of tilts out slightly, which means there is a slight gap here. And that also means that anytime I place it down on a surface, if the cartridge gets moved, as in if pressure goes here and it pushes it against here and it releases the contacts at the bottom, it crashes. So like I'll be halfway through a game, I'll pop, particularly with things like Pokemon Pinball where it sticks out at the top a bit, I'll put it down, it'll knock it, and my whole game will crash. So instead of doing the thing of using my original cartridges, which was a big part of the appeal for this, one of the things about this that's really good is that you can use Open FPGA. So the thing about this, and the thing that sets it aside from everything else is software emulation. This is hardware emulation. So it's got a chip on here that can mimic the chips of all of these original machines. So if I go to, say, Handheld, and I go to Game Boy, and I'll run that, and I'll open Tetris, it will behave just as the original hardware did. You can change various settings for the displays and so on, but the screen, everything else looks really, really good. Emulates everything absolutely perfectly and emulates a whole range of systems. There's a really good community for this. Lots of what are called cores, which is your different kind of chip emulators that emulate the hardware of the different machines. And yeah, you can play all sorts of different stuff on there. It looks good. It sounds great. It's got stereo speakers on the side here and they sound fantastic. And despite the shortcomings of the buttons, which is only really noticeable on certain games, it still does feel like a really premium experience. Part of me was stubborn and I'd spent so much money, I kind of felt like I had to use it to get my money's worth out of it. But when I'm sat there and I feel like I want to play for it, I am finding time and again, this is the console I'll reach for. So yes, you know, I've put it in the top 3 and all I've done is slate it with criticism, but you can't argue with the fact that this is what I keep picking up and playing and I am enjoying that experience. And I think it's only because I've spent so much time with it that the little things have annoyed me that bit more. But I wouldn't say I'd recommend it. I'd say it's a colossal waste of money and totally overpriced. But now I have got it, I think it's great. So I'm wanting to try out a plastic version of this console now as well, so I can compare and contrast the difference and see if the aluminium does really offer that bit more. But anyway, yeah, I was torn on this. It could have been at the top, it could have been at the bottom, so that's why it's ended up in 3rd place. So we're on the top 2, and in 2nd place, this is FunnyPlaying's FPGBC. This is different to every other console on the list because it doesn't emulate other games. There's no way of installing your other games. This only runs original cartridges. However, the cartridges are the only original thing about it. Let's take a look. So in the past, like I was talking about before with the OLED screen mod that you can do on the Game Boy Color, whether you were doing a brand new shell, whether you were installing a new screen or a speaker upgrade, you would always need to have the guts, the original hardware, the original motherboard in there to actually be able to create your new console. And that all changed when FunnyPlaying introduced this, what's become known as the FPGBC. So that's because it has an FPGA chip, just like we were talking about with the Analogue Pocket, and that emulates the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color hardware on a new motherboard that fits in the original style shell with a new screen that also fits in that assembly. It uses the original style buttons and it uses the original cartridges. It modernizes it in that it's got a rechargeable battery and a USB-C port at the bottom. It's got a really beefy speaker, almost sounds a little bit muffled to be honest compared to other speakers. So, you know, you may or may not like the speaker on this thing. I quite like it, particularly for the musical sounds that come out of the Game Boy. The display, you get lots of different options with it. There's a little dial on the side that also functions as a button where you can access your menu. And this is currently on the 1.1 firmware. It's been quite well supported with firmware updates that gradually improve the performance of this console. There are compromises. There are some changes that you have to make manually as to whether you're swapping between the original Game Boy display or Game Boy Color. This is currently on Game Boy Color, but if I change the core to Game Boy and then save that and reset the console, it will launch it as though I was playing on original Game Boy, and it will all come up in black and white. Whereas things like the Analogue Pocket will automatically detect the console that's in there and behave, you know, appropriately for the console itself. You don't have to make any particular changes. So again, if I wanted to change back there, I'd just go in here, change my core to Game Boy Color, and then save that and reset, and away we go. Some games look a little bit wrong in terms of certain colors, so there is a color fix that you can apply, and again you apply it and you restart. So there are some slight shortcomings, but that screen is huge. So if I put Tetris DX in this original, now this is larger than the original Game Boy Color display anyway, but if you look at these two side by side, this is a much bigger display. It's a bit less bright, little less saturated than the OLED display. This is a IPS display, I think. I don't know, I'm no good with these sort of technical things. But yeah, I think this is great. I can adjust the volume just by nudging that dial down, but also you get the option to choose between different displays for this, and it will remember whatever you sort of set last time. Now for me, you know, glasses wearer, getting on a little bit, the bigger the better for me to be able to see my games on these tiny little handhelds. However, the options that are there are really quite comprehensive. Originally there were just a few, but now, as I say, with these firmware updates, you get a number of different ones. So I've got it on full mode, but you can swap between the sort of 4 times upscaled from the original display, which is pixel perfect but larger than the original display. You can do the same with like a grid overlay, so it looks a bit more pixelated like the original console. Then there is a full MU version, which is where the colors are a little bit more muted to try and match the original Game Boy Color style, which was a bit of a more earthy tone to it. But you know, the extent to which that works, I'm not entirely convinced. So I tend to prefer it on the full setting, but you can swap between those very easily, and then you just come back out of this menu by pressing here. There are 1 or 2 games that it won't play, but pretty much nearly all games I've tried on here work really well. There's some slight issues with flash carts, but to be honest, if you're using flash carts and you've got an SD card with all your games on, you might be better off using something like the TrimUI Brick instead. Like if you just want to play ROMs, I don't think this is necessarily the solution. I think there are other things that do it better and offer more. So for me, the fact that this doesn't really behave brilliantly with all of the flash carts doesn't bother me too much. I've got quite a collection of original cartridges. This plays them really well. And I think the really special thing about this, having been a Game Boy modder for quite some time now, having seen beautiful, perfectly working original consoles cannibalized to make what are not always brilliantly modded consoles, it's sad to see. And the more that this hobby moves on, the fewer of these things will be available. I mean, by all means, take older damaged consoles and restore them into something awesome like I've done here. However, if you've got something that is original and looks great and works fine, leave it as it is, because now there is an alternative. There is a whole new motherboard that you can use. Nothing from the original Game Boy is used on here, as I say, other than the cartridge. And I think that's something awesome for preservation of these games moving forward. The cartridges will always be available. With the consoles in short supply, it's good to have something that gives you the authentic experience. Yes, the emulation of the hardware isn't actually as good. The clock speed has some issues, and if you're really picky about that, then that might bother you. To be honest, I've not really noticed any issues with that. While the hardware emulation of the Analogue Pocket is better, this is the original shape, the exact same shape and button arrangement as the original Game Boy Color. So no matter how good this is at emulating the hardware, this will feel like that original experience that bit more in terms of the ergonomics, in terms of the feel, in terms of that nostalgic kick you get when you pick up the console. And it is really cheap. unlike this one. So yeah, I was very, very tempted to put this at the top. I think there's a lot of discussion about the pros and cons. Yes, this has shortcomings. Yes, all these consoles have shortcomings, but this really does something different. It does it very, very well, and it is very, very cheap. Also, you don't buy it as a pre-built console. I haven't mentioned that. You have to build it yourself. It's very straightforward to put together. You don't have to be an expert modder. It's more like assembling, you know, if you can tackle a decent sized Lego kit, you'll be fine with this. So yeah, I think this is doing something different to everybody else, and FunnyPlaying are to be applauded for jumping in and doing that. I am very glad it's been such a success. It is a great little machine. It feels just like playing an original Game Boy Color. It's got a larger display. It's got decent sound. It can play nearly all of my original games, and it's cheap too. What more to like? Which brings us to the #1 spot, and if you've been paying attention, it won't come as any surprise that for me, my absolute favorite handheld console that I've got my hands on this year is the TrimUI SmartPro. Now, this has been around for a while. I've only come across it fairly recently. I'll be honest, I wasn't really expecting to like it that much. I had it sent to me for review by Lit NXT. I've got a video that you can check out. I'll link it later on. But yeah, the landscape format isn't really usually for me. However, it really won me over. Let's take a look at why. Okay, so the actual layout of this is very similar to the PlayStation Vita. Now, I traditionally call myself a Game Boy gamer. My hands feel comfortable in this kind of portrait mode with vertical consoles, and I did actually really like the PlayStation Vita, and I found it comfortable to use. I play Nintendo Switch a lot, which is also a handheld that's, you know, a landscape format. But this one, when it came out, it didn't really grab me. Other people had told me it was going to be good. I should have listened to them. It's got little analog sticks. It's got fancy little LEDs around those analog sticks. It's got a really quite nice, I mean, it is plastic. It's very plasticky, but it's quite a nice premium feel to it. It feels nice and solid. The layout of everything is really carefully considered, from the different shoulder buttons at the top and how comfortably my fingers sit on those, to the very smooth surface across the back, which makes it very comfortable to just sit and hold like that. The buttons and D-pad are quite small. In fact, the D-pad is the only criticism I'd have of this. I don't think it's that great. It's good enough. It works fine. It's not very good for like your Street Fighter games where you're having to kind of roll around and execute your Shoryukens and whatever else. But the joystick works really well for that. And you've always got the option of the D-pad and the stick. The D-pad a little bit sharp on the edges, a little bit small, but for a lot of games, absolutely fine. And for a lot of other games, the joystick works surprisingly well, better than, you know, I normally wouldn't go to the analog sticks, particularly for older games. It feels wrong, you know, when they were originally going to work with a digital input, I'd go for the D-pad. But I think the analog stick's quite good. The spacing of the buttons and the analog sticks is good. The home button works well. The thing that really makes it is this operating system. I mentioned briefly before on the TrimUI Brick, I was using a version of CrossMix. Now, this is the fully fledged working version of CrossMix. So it's not an entirely new operating system. It is a very cleverly designed overlay to work with the existing stock operating system. However, it makes it better in just about every way. From choosing your console to choosing your games, as you go through, and the menus and the images that you get and the background images, everything works smoothly. It loads quickly. It looks good. There's just so much to say about this console that I really like. It is a large screen, so even if you're playing some older consoles like this and you have borders down the side, so if I just insert coin there and you look at the size of the display there, even compared to, say for example, this console here, the display on there is still smaller than what you've got. So this is really versatile. So you can go through lots of different things. There are apps that you can go in, and there are the different emulators, each one with a little icon of how it looks. I just really like the interface in terms of selecting your console and then going in and selecting your game. Also, with the CrossMix card that came with it, the selection of games in there is really good. If I go to different versions, there are like different hacks of games. This one, a particular favorite, Tetris Rosy Retrospection. It's like your original Tetris. However, you'll notice notice also, by the way, that when I load a game, it drops me in at exactly where I was up to last time. It makes a kind of save state as you exit and then loads it up again. Also, the LEDs around the stick, I've got that into Ambilight mode, which kind of mirror whatever's the dominant color on screen, which is quite nice. So one of the things about this is it looks just like the original Tetris, but it's got extra features that you will find in more modern versions of Tetris. So yeah, if you haven't played that before, it's definitely worth checking out. And that's one of the things that I've liked about this, you know, to be able to just pause, go to your menu screen. You can create save states or you can just exit straight away. Advanced menu gives you more things that you can do, and then you straight out. It's quite quick with that. Now, when you want to switch off, you can go in sleep mode by just tapping the power button at the top. The sleep mode on this and the TrimUI Brick as well is phenomenal. Like, you can shut it down, but really I'll switch this into sleep mode, come back to it a few days later, and it's only lost a minimal amount of battery. Now, compared to lots of other ones on this list where I wouldn't leave them on sleep mode because they'll just drain the battery as much as having the console switched on, this is a console that does it right. So yeah, while it is a portable system, it's not really eminently pocketable. If you do want something smaller and more handy for getting about with, then the TrimUI Brick offers so much of what this already offers, but in a much more compact format. So as I say, I was torn. Like, I might have had this one at the top of my list, but really I have spent so much time with this console, to the extent that the review video I did took me ages to build because I was having so much fun playing on it. I wasn't expecting to like it. I love it. I've spent lots and lots of time enjoying games on lots of different systems, and with these sort of handheld emulators, I'm really prone to just dipping in and out and having a quick few minutes on and can't really settle on anything. I've completed game after game after game on this. The ergonomics are great, it's comfortable to hold, you don't get cramps after a long amount of time that you may end up doing with something small like this here. So I was torn. It was difficult putting together a list. I am sure that many of you out there will totally disagree with the order in which I put those, but I hope that what I've said about why I've chosen each one is, you know, making sense to you at least, and you can empathize with why I've put them in that order. And it's always cause for discussion, which is always good fun anyway, isn't it? One more thing about this though, in terms of choosing these different ones, this is by no means all of the handhelds that came out this year. And in fact, I think some of these didn't even necessarily come out this year. It's just the ones that have come into my possession this year. So yeah, yours may be a different collection to mine. If there's any I didn't pick up this year that you think maybe I should have done, I am interested to hear in the comments. As I say, I have yet to find the grail, the one that does everything, the Game Boy to end all Game Boys. I don't think that's ever going to happen. And to be honest, if it did, I think I'd be disappointed. I enjoy the thrill of the chase and I enjoy trying out new things. So that is it for now. Lots of the consoles on this video you can actually get from Lit NXT. They have provided me with a couple of review units recently, which I've been really grateful for. And I've got a discount code, Joe Bleeps, which will get you 10% off, and a referral link in the description, which will support my channel if you buy anything from them. So check that out. Also, if you're doing modded Game Boys, if you're building something like the FunnyPlaying FPGBC, or you're doing one of these OLED mods or anything else with Game Boys, check out ZedLabz. They've been supporting me for a long time. Again, affiliate link in the description there that automatically discounts your order as well. So if you want to get into modding, that's the place to go. And if you want to support my channel, those are things you can do. Also, to support me, subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, comment. I love the interaction with people, so please do that. And yeah, just keep watching my videos. Thank you very much for watching this one. So the SmartPro comes out on top. If you want to watch my more in-depth review of that one, I am going to link it up here. Also in the description, I will link reviews and videos for all of the other ones that I've featured in this video. That's all the handheld consoles I got my hands on this year. I hope you enjoyed my little breakdown, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.